The Book of Job stands as one of the most profound and mysterious writings within the biblical canon. More than a story of individual suffering, it is a theological drama that wrestles with the deepest questions of justice, providence, and the limits of human understanding. Job, a righteous man caught in the whirlwind of inexplicable affliction, becomes the canvas upon which divine truth is painted. Yet as the story unfolds, it becomes evident that the real climax is not found in Job's trials or the speeches of his companions, but in the appearance of two enigmatic creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan. These are not casual inclusions, nor are they incidental flourishes of ancient poetry. They are central figures in the divine revelation, introduced at the height of God's answer to Job, demanding that we take them seriously if we are to understand the full message of the book. Their descriptions are unlike anything else in Scripture. Behemoth is massive, immovable, and grounded, a creature of the land whose strength lies not in its aggression, but in its unshakable stability. Leviathan, on the other hand, is a beast of the sea, unpredictable and terrifying, clothed in fire and thunder beyond any human capacity to tame. Their names evoke wonder and dread. Their presence lingers long after the divine speech ends, and their symbolic weight has echoed through centuries of interpretation. Why would a discourse on justice and suffering conclude with vivid portraits of two creatures that appear at first glance to have nothing to do with Job's pain? This question lies at the heart of our exploration. To treat Behemoth and Leviathan as mere animals is to flatten their significance. The detail with which they are described, the tone in which God speaks of them, and their placement in the narrative all suggest something far deeper. These are not characters in a zoological lesson. They are revelations of power, mystery, and the divine architecture of reality. Their function is not explanatory but revelatory. They do not answer Job's questions in the way he expects. Instead, they reshape the very nature of the questions themselves, inviting him and us into a larger vision of how the cosmos is ordered and who stands at its center. The presence of these creatures at the climax of the book suggests that they hold a key to interpreting the divine response. God does not offer Job a systematic theology of suffering. He offers a tour of creation, crowned with Behemoth and Leviathan as the final and most profound illustrations. These two creatures serve as bookends to the cosmic theater that unfolds in the divine speech. Behemoth grounds us in the power and purpose of the earth, while Leviathan reveals the chaos that lurks beneath the surface. Together, they form a complete picture of creation, strength and storm, stability and threat, both ultimately under divine control. In raising these creatures before Job, God shifts the conversation away from the moral calculus of retribution and reward. Instead of defending divine justice in terms that Job can weigh and measure, God presents a reality that cannot be tamed by human logic. The world is not lawless, but neither is it simplistic. The presence of Leviathan does not negate order. The presence of Behemoth does not remove mystery. Both coexist within a creation that is vast, intricate, and governed by a wisdom that Job and all of humanity cannot fully grasp. It is this tension between what is seen and what is hidden, between strength and chaos, that God uses to speak to Job's condition. This introduction prepares us to explore the deeper meanings embedded in these figures. Each chapter that follows will draw out the layers of symbolism and theological insight that Behemoth and Leviathan offer. They are more than creatures, they are signs of a divine order that includes what we fear and what we trust, what we understand and what we do not. They call us to humility, to reverence, and ultimately to a deeper faith in a God who governs not only the calm, but also the storm. When the divine voice finally pierces the silence in the book of Job, it does not arrive as one might expect. There is no gentle reassurance, no direct explanation of Job's ordeal, no unveiling of the heavenly wager that readers were privy to from the beginning. Instead, the voice comes suddenly, wrapped in the fierce imagery of a whirlwind. This moment is pivotal, not only because it marks the climax of the narrative, but because it fundamentally reshapes the framework through which the entire book must be understood. The whirlwind is not merely a dramatic setting. It is a deliberate choice, reflecting a tradition that associates divine manifestation with powerful elements of nature. In the Hebrew scriptures, God reveals himself through fire, storm, thunder, and earthquake. Mount Sinai trembled, and smoke engulfed its peak when Moses received the law. Elijah encountered wind and fire before hearing the still, small voice. But here, with Job, it is the whirlwind that sets the stage for a divine encounter. The image is one of overwhelming force, of an untamable natural phenomenon that commands attention and awe. From within this whirlwind, God speaks, not with soft comforts, but with a barrage of questions. These questions are not meant to belittle Job, but to lift him out of the narrow confines of human suffering and redirect his gaze toward a broader cosmic reality. The questions do not dismiss Job's pain. Rather, they reframe it within the mystery of creation itself. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb? Have you commanded the morning since your days began? These are not rhetorical flourishes. They are foundational inquiries into the very nature of knowledge, existence, and divine order. What is remarkable is that the speech begins not with moral philosophy or divine judgment, but with the grandeur of the natural world. God calls Job to observe the expanses of the earth, the constellations in the sky, the wildness of animals, the cycles of day and night. The divine emphasis is overwhelmingly ecological and cosmological. Every detail draws attention to the complexity and intentionality of creation, one that exists far beyond human control or comprehension. It is as though God is saying, if you cannot grasp the workings of the visible world, how can you hope to understand the invisible justice that governs it? This moment is theological in its core. It confronts the limitations of human reasoning when faced with divine governance. Job, who has demanded a hearing, who has pleaded for a courtroom scenario in which he might defend his innocence before God, finds himself drawn into something entirely different. Instead of receiving legal clarity, he is immersed in a vision of order that exceeds logic. The questions do not answer Job's demands, but they answer Job's soul. They lead him into an encounter with transcendence, an experience of the one who sustains the cosmos without needing to justify his actions to human expectations. It is within this divine monologue that the images of Behemoth and Leviathan begin to take form. Yet they are introduced only after a long and intentional preamble in which Job is drawn into the rhythms of nature and the sovereign hand behind them. This sequencing is essential. Before Job can hear of these two mysterious creatures, he must first be humbled by the majesty of creation itself. The wild goats, the ostrich that leaves its eggs in the dust, the horse that laughs at fear, all of these precede the introduction of the two giants. Each serves as a stepping stone, moving Job closer to an awareness not only of God's creative power, but also of his own finitude within it. The divine voice does not diminish Job. On the contrary, it elevates him by revealing the vastness of reality and his unique place within it. Job is not chastised for seeking justice. He is invited into a deeper understanding of what justice looks like when viewed through the lens of creation. It is not retribution or balance alone. It is harmony within complexity, purpose beyond sight, sovereignty that encompasses both chaos and order. When God speaks, he does not dismantle Job's integrity. In fact, Job is not accused of wrongdoing. The divine questions are not a reprimand, but a revelation. They do not answer why Job suffers, but they offer something more enduring, a vision of God that is vast, unpredictable, and profoundly present. It is this vision that will ultimately transform Job, not knowledge of the why, but an encounter with the who. And yet the culmination of this divine speech does not rest in the whirlwind alone. It advances towards something even more vivid and unsettling: the emergence of two creatures whose existence seems to transcend natural categories. Behemoth and Leviathan will not be spoken of as mere animals, nor as metaphors in isolation. Their descriptions will stand apart in both tone and content, marking them as unique within the divine response. But before these creatures are fully introduced, the whirlwind has done its work. It has exposed the fragile scaffolding of human certainty. It has laid bare the impossibility of containing God within the boundaries of explanation. And it has cleared the space for what comes next, a revelation not only of creatures, but of the deeper cosmic realities they symbolize. In the heart of the divine address, after drawing Job's attention to the wonders and mysteries of creation, the voice from the whirlwind introduces a creature unlike any that preceded it. Behemoth, mentioned in Job 40, verse 15 through verse 24, is not simply added to the litany of animals described earlier. It is elevated, described with a weight and reverence that set it apart. The text begins with an unmistakable declaration: "Look at Behemoth, which I made along with you." From this opening line, the intention becomes clear. Behemoth is not merely an object of observation. It is a mirror to Job's own existence, a living symbol placed before him to reflect divine strength, purpose, and design. What follows is not a scientific account, nor is it a mythical fable. It is a poetic yet precise unveiling of a reality that defies ordinary comprehension. Behemoth eats grass like an ox, and yet possesses bones like tubes of bronze and limbs like bars of iron. It moves with the hidden power of the earth itself, lying under the lotus plants, unbothered by the turbulent river. This creature is not aggressive, but neither is it docile. It exists in harmony with its environment, yet it is untouchable by human force. The poetic structure of the passage points to something far more than a naturalistic description. Every detail is saturated with symbolic weight. One of the most striking phrases appears in verse 19. It ranks first among the works of God, yet its maker can approach it with his sword. This statement alone carries theological depth. To be called the first of God's works is not simply to indicate chronological sequence, but to signal prominence, excellence, and archetypal importance. Behemoth is placed at the head of creation's procession, not because of its destructiveness, but because of its embodiment of restrained might. It represents unshakable strength that exists within boundaries established by divine will. Unlike the other animals that roam, hunt, or flee, Behemoth is described as stationary, content, powerful yet passive. Its presence evokes the immovable foundations of the earth. It is not portrayed as violent or destructive, but as stable, grounded, and enduring. This is not coincidental. In a discourse about divine power and human limitation, Behemoth serves as a living testimony to a kind of power that is neither tyrannical nor chaotic. It is strength under control, power in submission, might governed by higher authority. The significance of this creature becomes even more apparent when we consider the context of Job's suffering. Job has been crushed by forces beyond his control. He has watched as his life was reduced to ashes by what appeared to be a random and brutal series of events. In this state of loss, the concept of power would naturally seem threatening, even cruel. Yet Behemoth challenges that perception. It shows that power, even when vast and untamable by human hands, can exist under divine restraint. It suggests that true strength is not found in domination, but in submission to a higher order. In Behemoth, we see a reflection of creation as it was meant to be, majestic, formidable, and yet peaceful, within the boundaries of divine command. Its very existence speaks of a world that is not ruled by chance or violence, but by intention and order. It embodies a kind of dominion that reflects the Creator rather than rebels against him, and in doing so, it redefines the meaning of strength, not as the ability to conquer, but as the capacity to remain grounded, unmoved, and fully aligned with the purpose for which it was made. Job, who has wrestled with the absence of justice and the silence of heaven, is now confronted with an image of power that is both fearsome and trustworthy. Behemoth cannot be subdued by human effort, yet it does not threaten human existence. It is a creature that demands respect, not fear. This too is a form of divine instruction. God is revealing to Job that not all power is hostile, and not all mysteries are dangerous. Some exist simply to remind humanity that there is a strength in the universe far greater than their own, and that this strength is not arbitrary, but governed by a wisdom that sees beyond what the eye can perceive. The stillness of Behemoth is its lesson. In a world that often equates movement with life and action with value, Behemoth's calm presence beside the river, undisturbed by the rush of waters, stands as a counter-narrative. It teaches that enduring power does not always roar or rage. Sometimes it rests in the quiet confidence of knowing its place in the divine order. For Job, and for every reader since, this image serves as a turning point. Behemoth is not an answer to suffering, but it is a reminder of structure, of intention, of a cosmos where even the strongest forces are not beyond control. And in that control lies hope. Not because the world is tame, but because it is tethered. Not because we understand it, but because it has been made with a purpose beyond our understanding. As the divine speech reaches its crescendo, following the grounded majesty of Behemoth, the focus turns dramatically to another creature, one that does not dwell in the fields or rest by the riverside, but emerges from the depths of the sea, cloaked in mystery and terror. Leviathan, described in vivid and terrifying imagery in Job chapter 41, is unlike any other figure in the divine address. If Behemoth stands as a monument to strength under submission, Leviathan is portrayed as the very embodiment of resistance, a living tempest of chaos beyond human comprehension and utterly untouchable by human hands. From the opening lines of the chapter, the tone shifts. Can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook or tie down its tongue with a rope? This rhetorical question immediately sets the stage. Leviathan is not to be captured, tamed, or even engaged by human force. It belongs to a realm beyond reach, its very presence a challenge to any illusion of control. The descriptions that follow grow increasingly fearsome, with scales that are described as shields, locked together so tightly that no air can pass between them. Breath that sets coals ablaze, and a body that leaves a glistening wake in the sea like that of a boiling cauldron. These images are not random. They form a tapestry of symbols deeply rooted in the biblical tradition, where the sea often represents chaos and unpredictability. In Genesis, the Spirit of God hovers over the waters before order is spoken into existence. In the Psalms, the sea is both praised and feared as something only God can master. Psalm 104 verse 26, for instance, speaks of Leviathan as one of the creatures God formed to frolic in the sea, suggesting that even this terrifying entity exists within divine boundaries. And yet the portrayal in Job 41 is far more ominous, stressing the creature's invincibility and the terror it inspires. Leviathan, then, is not merely a sea monster. It is the symbolic embodiment of the forces that resist divine order, the powers that dwell in the shadows and beneath the surface of what is seen. Its scales reflect not just physical invulnerability, but spiritual arrogance, a pride that does not yield, a being whose very nature defies harmony. It is the antithesis of Behemoth. Where Behemoth represents strength in submission, Leviathan represents strength in rebellion. And yet, both are described by the same divine voice, framed not as equals in conflict, but as contrasting figures within a world that remains under ultimate divine authority. The implications of Leviathan's depiction stretch far beyond the book of Job. In Isaiah chapter 27, verse 1, the prophet speaks of a day when the Lord will punish Leviathan, the gliding serpent, with his great and powerful sword. This prophecy casts Leviathan not just as a creature of the sea, but as a symbol of evil, a spiritual force that will one day be destroyed. The imagery deepens further in Revelation, where the dragon, the ancient serpent who is called the devil, and Satan is cast down, echoing the chaos figure of Leviathan, now clearly linked with cosmic opposition to God's kingdom. Such connections are not coincidental. They form a consistent biblical motif in which Leviathan becomes a shorthand for chaos, for unrestrained pride, for the darkness that seeks to unravel divine harmony. In the ancient world, chaos was not merely disorder, but a threat to life itself. It was that which undid creation, the undoing of boundaries, the return to a formless void. Leviathan is this chaos personified. It is the swirling, roaring terror beneath the calm surface of human existence, the enemy that cannot be fought with earthly weapons. And yet, what is perhaps most surprising about God's speech in Job 41 is that Leviathan is not portrayed as a rival to be feared, but as a creature already known, described, and held in place by the one who created it. The text declares that no sword or spear can pierce it, no warrior can subdue it, but it also makes clear that God alone can engage it. Everything about Leviathan is terrifying. Its sneezes flash forth light, its eyes shine like the rays of dawn, its mouth spits fire. But all of this is spoken not in dread, but in sovereignty. The creature is frightening, but not outside of divine knowledge. It roams, but it does not rule. This is the paradox of Leviathan. It represents the forces that seek to resist the divine, yet it is still bound within the speech of the divine. God describes Leviathan not to terrify Job, but to reveal that even the most fearsome realities are not beyond his reach. In doing so, he offers a kind of comfort that does not diminish the seriousness of evil or chaos, but affirms that these forces do not reign. Leviathan may be the pinnacle of terror, but it is still a creature, not a god. For Job, this revelation is profound. He has lived through what felt like unrestrained chaos. His world was torn apart, his body afflicted, his reputation ruined. In such a storm, it would be easy to believe that the universe is ruled by forces of cruelty or randomness. But the introduction of Leviathan, placed within the divine speech, makes a bold theological statement. Even chaos has its boundaries. Even the darkest forces answer to a higher authority. And even when the sea churns and fire emerges from the deep, the Creator remains enthroned above it all. Leviathan, then, is not only a warning, it is a revelation of power restrained, terror permitted, and evil observed. It is a call to see beyond the surface of suffering into the unseen structures of a cosmos that, while containing chaos, is not ruled by it. In the narrative arc of Job, Leviathan's appearance is not merely an artistic climax, it is a theological exclamation. It declares that the world is more mysterious than we imagine, but also more secure than we fear. The inclusion of Behemoth and Leviathan at the culmination of God's speech to Job is not an arbitrary poetic flourish. It is an intentional act of theological revelation, designed not only to conclude the divine address, but to encapsulate its entire message within two embodied symbols. These creatures are not merely curiosities from the ancient imagination, nor are they remnants of myth smuggled into scripture for dramatic effect. They are deliberately chosen representatives of the two great realms of creation, land and sea, standing at the very edge of human comprehension, beyond the reach of human mastery. Through them, God unveils a truth about the structure of existence itself, a truth that Job, and through him, every reader must confront, that all power, whether rooted in the earth or surging from the deep, lies within the boundaries of divine sovereignty. Behemoth and Leviathan are not rivals, they are complements. One, grounded and massive, speaks of the weight and permanence of terrestrial power. The other, fluid and elusive, embodies the threat of what lies hidden and untamed. They do not merely reflect two aspects of the natural world. They represent the theological duality that runs through all of existence, the stable and the chaotic, the seen and the hidden, the firm and the shifting. In them, God offers a living parable of how the world truly operates, not in simplistic terms of good versus evil, but in complex tensions that are all nevertheless enclosed within divine control. Behemoth, as the grounded embodiment of earthly power, presents a vision of force that is steady, rooted and obedient to its place in the natural order. It does not assert itself as ruler, though it cannot be ruled by men. It does not wander aimlessly, nor does it sow destruction. It is a monument of unyielding strength that does not threaten the fabric of creation, but rather supports it. Behemoth illustrates that true power does not need to display itself with violence. It can rest, lie hidden among the reeds, and still be unshakably present. In its stillness, it asserts an order that is reassuring, a stability that reflects the character of the one who made it. Leviathan, in stark contrast, represents the unpredictable and often terrifying realm of chaos. It is a creature whose breath kindles coals, whose movements churn the sea like a boiling pot. There is nothing passive about Leviathan. Its presence evokes dread, its appearance suggests danger, and its power cannot be grasped. Yet even Leviathan, with all its terrifying attributes, is known, described, and placed within the narrative by God himself. It is not running loose through the cosmos. It is being spoken about, depicted with the same poetic authority as any other part of creation. That act alone demystifies Leviathan's supremacy. It is fearsome, yes, but not autonomous. It can resist man, but not its maker. Together, these two creatures establish a theological boundary for human understanding. They remind Job, and all who read his story, that the world is not divided between what God controls and what he does not. Rather, all things, even those beyond understanding and mastery, belong within a divine architecture of meaning. God is not a distant observer reacting to chaos. He is the one who contains it, who gives it form, and who uses it even to teach, to humble, and to reveal. Their juxtaposition is essential. If only Behemoth had been mentioned, one might conclude that God's order is only found in the quiet, in the still, in the predictable. But the inclusion of Leviathan asserts that divine dominion extends even into the realm of the violent, the unmanageable, the monstrous. God's sovereignty is not limited to the garden, it stretches into the abyss. It does not merely comfort the sufferer by affirming what is gentle, it challenges the sufferer by asserting control over what is terrifying. This is why these two figures close the divine speech. They do not answer Job's questions in words. They answer them in presence. Their very existence and God's intimate knowledge of them is the answer. There is no part of the cosmos that lies beyond the Creator's grasp. For Job, this is a turning point. The world that once seemed to collapse around him is now reframed. His suffering has not vanished, but it has been recontextualized. It is not senseless, it is not outside the scope of God's care or command. If even Behemoth and Leviathan, the two most untamable beings in creation, are known, observed, and described by God, then Job's life too exists within that same attentive gaze. The presence of divine order within the fiercest chaos reveals not a neglectful silence, but a purposeful restraint. Power does not run wild. It moves in a pattern, one that human beings may not fully perceive, but which nonetheless holds them securely. This theology of dominion is not merely abstract. It reshapes how suffering is perceived. It replaces panic with perspective, not by minimizing pain, but by locating it within a cosmos that is not fractured but whole. The terrifying, the confusing, the tragic, none of it lies outside the scope of divine authority. This does not make suffering easy. It makes it intelligible, not in terms of causality, but in terms of context. Job does not learn why he suffered. He learns that his suffering occurred in a world that is still under God's rule. And that changes everything. The figure of Leviathan, introduced with such force and mystery in the book of Job, does not disappear into silence once God's speech concludes. Instead, it continues to echo throughout the scriptures, gradually transforming into one of the most significant symbols of cosmic opposition in the biblical narrative. From the Psalms to the prophetic writings and into the apocalyptic visions of Revelation, Leviathan evolves from a poetic image of sea-bound terror into the embodiment of evil, chaos, and ultimately Satan himself. Its presence in prophecy is not a mere literary recurrence, but a deliberate theological thread woven to reveal the nature of divine victory over all that resists God's order. In Psalm 74, Leviathan appears in a context that recalls divine triumph. The psalmist looks back on creation and invokes a memory of God breaking the heads of the sea monsters and crushing the heads of Leviathan, making it food for the creatures of the wilderness. This passage does not describe a literal battle, but draws upon ancient imagery to depict the supremacy of God over forces that seek to undo the harmony of creation. Leviathan, with its multiple heads, is presented not as a singular animal, but as a representation of multiplied resistance, a chaos that spreads itself across the sea, only to be brought low by the hand of the Creator. The symbolism becomes more explicit in Isaiah chapter 27, verse 1, where the prophet envisions a future day of judgment. In that day, the Lord will punish with his fierce and powerful sword, Leviathan the gliding serpent, Leviathan the coiling serpent. He will slay the monster of the sea. This prophetic declaration speaks of a final reckoning, a moment when divine justice will confront and destroy the most formidable adversaries of God's people. The repetitive phrasing, gliding and coiling serpent, amplifies the idea of deception, movement, and subtle rebellion. Leviathan here is no longer merely natural. It has become a moral and spiritual figure, the enemy of God's kingdom clothed in the form of ancient chaos. What begins in Job as a creature described with awe and fear is now, in the prophets, an image of resistance that must be overcome. This shift from poetic to prophetic language does not diminish Leviathan's significance, but magnifies it. It transforms the creature into a cosmic antagonist, standing in opposition not just to human safety, but to divine sovereignty. It becomes the ultimate adversary, present not only in the sea, but in the spiritual landscape of the world. The terror Leviathan evokes is no longer only physical, it is metaphysical. It points to something that lurks beneath the surface of history, culture, and human nature itself. This transformation reaches its full expression in the book of Revelation, where the imagery of Leviathan merges with that of the ancient serpent, the great dragon. Revelation chapter 12 describes a war in heaven, where the dragon, identified explicitly as the devil or Satan, is hurled down to the earth. This dragon, like Leviathan, is described in terrifying detail, possessing great power, a tail that sweeps a third of the stars from the sky, and a voice that deceives the nations. It is Leviathan in its final form, an image not only of chaos, but of rebellion, accusation, and death. Yet even here, in the climax of apocalyptic vision, the outcome is never in doubt. Revelation chapter 20, verse 10 announces the dragon's end. The devil, who deceived them, is thrown into the lake of fire and tormented forever. The figure that once loomed over Job's vision of divine power, that once slithered through prophetic oracles as the enemy of order, is now judged and destroyed. The same pattern that began in Job, a creature beyond human control yet firmly within divine knowledge, now concludes with total defeat, not through war waged by men, but through the sovereign act of divine justice. What emerges from this scriptural journey is a profound theological insight. Leviathan is not simply a terrifying creature. It is a symbol of every force that threatens to defy God's rule, whether that force appears in nature, in nations, or in the human heart. Its presence in prophecy reveals the continuity of the biblical story, a story in which evil is never left unchallenged and chaos is never allowed to reign unchecked. From Job to Revelation, the message remains consistent. What appears invincible is not eternal, and what terrifies for a season is destined for judgment. In this prophetic vision, Christ stands as the one who defeats Leviathan not by brute force, but through sacrificial triumph. The cross becomes the moment when chaos is exposed and its sting removed. Christ enters the realm where Leviathan seems strongest, death itself, and emerges victorious. This victory redefines the narrative, showing that Leviathan's defeat was never only about power, it was about redemption. The ancient beast, once cloaked in fire and scale, is undone not by another beast, but by a lamb. This is the final reversal, the gospel hidden in the bones of a monster. The turning point in the book of Job does not come when his circumstances are reversed or when his health is restored. It comes much earlier, in the quiet aftermath of God's overwhelming speech, when Job is no longer speaking from a place of protest, but from a place of reverence. He who had once cried out for justice, who demanded a hearing before the Creator of the universe, now places his hand over his mouth and confesses his own smallness. This shift in posture is not the result of intimidation or divine threat. It is the natural response to an encounter with a reality far larger, deeper, and more intricate than Job had ever imagined. This transformation begins not with answers but with vision. Job has seen not the reasons behind his suffering, but the one who governs all things, who speaks of morning stars, wild creatures, and monstrous beings with the same calm authority. The God who describes Behemoth and Leviathan does not explain why Job has suffered, but reveals something more lasting, that even the most chaotic and powerful forces in existence are under control. This is not the control of constraint, but of understanding and purpose. Behemoth and Leviathan are not random additions to the speech. They are revelations of the vastness and depth of divine sovereignty, and it is in that vastness that Job finds the beginning of peace. When Job responds in chapter 42, his words are few but weighty. I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. This is not resignation, but recognition. Job is no longer appealing to his own righteousness or questioning divine justice. He has stepped into a new awareness, one shaped not by the clarity of logic, but by the clarity of perspective. He confesses that he spoke of things he did not understand, things too wonderful for him to know. The irony is that Job, the man of extraordinary integrity, never stopped believing in God's justice. What changed was his view of his own understanding. He no longer assumes that his perspective is sufficient to interpret the whole of reality. This transformation is not marked by defeat, but by humility. It is a humility born from awe, not despair. It does not erase Job's pain, nor does it suggest that suffering is trivial. What it does is lift Job out of the center of the narrative. He now sees himself not as the victim of unjust treatment, but as part of a creation filled with mysteries that speak of a higher order. He acknowledges that the world is more complex than a simple equation of good behavior leading to reward. Behemoth and Leviathan, as images of strength and chaos, become the backdrop against which Job reassesses his place in the cosmos. What makes Job's change so profound is that it happens before any restoration takes place. He does not respond this way because his fortunes are returned. He responds this way because he has seen enough to trust. That is the essence of true transformation, not a shift in circumstances, but a shift in sight. To move from demanding to accepting, from speaking to listening, from pride to surrender. This is not weakness. It is the strength of one who has seen the storm, heard the voice from within it, and come away not with certainty, but with reverence. Job's transformation offers a pattern for every person who grapples with suffering and control. Often, we seek answers as if they are the key to peace. But what Job discovers is that peace does not come through explanation. It comes through revelation, not of information, but of presence. When one sees that the same God who created the cosmos also governs the chaos, trust becomes possible. The creatures that once seemed to symbolize the terrifying unknown now point to something steady and certain. That nothing, not even Leviathan, lies outside the scope of divine knowledge. This is not a naive trust. It is trust forged in the fire of grief, confusion, and silence. It is trust that has wrestled with God and found not defeat, but awe. Job does not abandon his integrity. Instead, it matures. It grows into something more lasting than protest, into worship. His repentance in dust and ashes is not an admission of guilt, but a gesture of realignment. He no longer tries to bring God into his courtroom. He steps into the temple of the world and bows in reverence to the God who made it. This is the transformation that marks not just the end of Job's dialogue, but the rebirth of his soul. From the whirlwind of divine speech to the stillness of Job's repentance, the narrative of Leviathan and Behemoth moves through the corridors of poetry, prophecy, and personal transformation until it finally opens into a broader horizon. A horizon in which the gospel itself comes into view. These two creatures, so strange and fearsome, do not exist in theological isolation. They serve a purpose beyond the moment. They point with symbolic weight and prophetic clarity to the one who would come not to describe the cosmos, but to redeem it. In Jesus Christ, the wildness of Leviathan and the grounded might of Behemoth meet their match, not in a contest of raw strength, but in the arrival of perfect authority clothed in humility. Throughout the Gospels, Christ reveals his dominion over the very realms that Behemoth and Leviathan represent. When he calms the storm with a word, he shows that the churning sea and its unseen threats are not beyond his voice. When he walks upon the waves, he demonstrates that what terrifies men beneath the surface cannot shake him. When he casts out demons and heals the broken, he reorders creation itself, showing that he does not merely inhabit the world, but reclaims it from within. Each miracle is not only an act of compassion, but a declaration of mastery over what the ancient world feared most: chaos, disease, spiritual bondage, and death. The gospel does not shy away from confrontation with chaos. In fact, it confronts it head-on. The cross, the most chaotic moment in history, appears at first to be the triumph of Leviathan, the triumph of pride, cruelty, darkness, and rebellion. But hidden within that moment is the ultimate act of order, the supreme revelation of God's justice and mercy. Christ does not defeat Leviathan with force. He defeats it by entering into the very space it rules and draining it of power through self-sacrifice. The chaos of the cross becomes the doorway to peace. The tomb, silent and sealed like the belly of the sea, gives way to resurrection and victory. In Revelation, the victory becomes final. The dragon, who is called the ancient serpent, the deceiver of the world, is cast down. The sea, that ancient symbol of chaos, is no more. What remains is a new heaven and a new earth, where the power of God is not just seen, but fully experienced. In this final vision, the beasts of Job no longer need to terrify. They have been understood, their roles completed, their mystery absorbed into the larger story of redemption. And so, the Book of Job, though ancient and enigmatic, finds its fulfillment in the Gospel. Behemoth and Leviathan, those monumental creatures introduced in the divine speeches, are not theological dead ends. They are signposts. They remind us that true power does not reside in noise or terror, but in the quiet authority of the Creator who became flesh. They prepare the heart to see Christ, not only as a teacher or healer, but as the one who silences the storm and crushes the serpent's head. Job's story ends with restoration, but its greater legacy lies in its ability to guide us toward the cross. In its poetry, it whispers the name of the one who would come. In its whirlwind, it makes space for a voice that will speak not only in thunder but in love. And in its creatures, strange, powerful, unforgettable, it hides the truths that only the gospel can fully reveal. Thank you for joining this exploration into the mystery of Leviathan and Behemoth hidden within the Book of Job. If this message stirred your heart or opened your eyes to something deeper, consider subscribing to the channel for more biblical insights like this one. Don't forget to like the video, leave a comment below to share your thoughts or questions, and most importantly, share this message with friends and loved ones who may also be seeking understanding and hope. Until next time, stay rooted in truth and anchored in grace.